Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. Welcome, engagers, once again to another episode of the Professor Game Podcast, because we have today Jeremy with us, who is a longtime listener as well. But before we kick off, Jeremy, are you prepared to engage?
I'm prepared to engage, Rob.
Let's do this, because Jeremy Royster is a transformative curriculum author with extensive experience intrinsically motivating students through personalized instruction, and he has proven expertise amplifying engagement as an instructional technology professor through F.A.I.L University, his gamified platform, to deliver what he calls fearless adventures in learning, so F.A.I.L, to instructors. He's also certified in technology education, PK-12, and Education Technology Leadership, CETL. He is currently building virtual reality escape edX rooms in collaboration with Knowledge Avatars. Is there anything that we're missing from that intro, Jeremy, that we should mention?
Nothing I can think of. We'll probably fill it in as we do our interview.
I hope so. I definitely hope so. And talking about filling in those gaps, Jeremy, is there, a typical thing that you do every day? What I'm looking for here is we like to understand our guests. So we want to know what, a day in the life of Jeremy looks like. What are you doing, regularly?
Well, I'll give you my weekday schedule is the daily plan as best I can. And believe me, it's filled with chaos these days with the onslaught of COVID and the existence of 4 teenagers in my house. I have 4 kids. They just turned 15 and 19 at the oldest, and I have twin 17-year-olds. So a lot of hormones and a lot of emotions running high, as you can imagine. When I wake up in the morning, my wife and I, we have COVID dogs. I know that that's a pretty common pastime these days, is to get a dog because we have time to train and be with those dogs, and also they really do lift your spirits. I've never had a dog before. It's wonderful. So we walk our dogs, and that's a good time for my wife and I to plan the day, which is essential because we have so many different moving parts. She and I both work. She's an online tutor, and I teach full-time. So after we plan our day and we go for our walk, I then hurry off to school. I work in a middle school. I teach 6th grade social studies. And that is a lot of fun for me. It's always been a lot of fun because I see it as sort of a testing ground for my gamification experiments. And my students are the subjects. And it's not just me doing the testing, as we'll discuss more later, but they do their own experimentation, and so it's a lab with lots of activity and excitement and unusual outcomes, which are always learning experiences for all of us, I hope. Then I come home after work and walk the dogs again, usually by myself at this point because my wife is tutoring, and then I'll start doing some work for my business or help my kids with their homework if they need it, prepare dinner, or my kids might help. I have one in particular who loves to cook. And then if we have time, hopefully, whenever the homework is done early enough, we can play a game together. Oftentimes, my youngest son loves to play billiards, which we are fortunate enough to have a pool table in the basement, hand me down from my father's house. And we also will play board games on occasion. And then after dinner, again, clean up. We have TV nights, and we have nights where the kids go off and play with their friends online. They'll play online games like Minecraft or Overwatch or whatever else they like to do. Words with Friends sometimes, or we'll sit down together and try to come up with a film or a TV show that we like to watch together. That could take up to an hour. So sometimes we go to bed before we right. So we're trying to organize that system a little bit better. And figure out what we like. But anyway, that's pretty much it. And then my wife and I'll collapse and start over the next day.
That sounds very, very interesting. Many things to be done there, especially having kids around in the house. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
However, Jeremy, as you know, you've heard the podcast before. We like to sort of come in strong as well with this question. We like to know of a time where you set your eyes on achieving something, but you were going north, things went south. We want to know of a time of failure or first attempt in learning. In this case, it's not fearless adventures in learning.
Right.
It's a different one. But we'd like to know the time of that because we want to be there with you. We want to learn from your experience as well. We want to, make the best out of that for us and for the audience.
Yes. Well, failure is a part of every day of my life, and I think probably for everyone, we all have our goals, small or large, that we are unable to meet the way we envision them at first. But I think embracing that failure and seeing that failure as a learning opportunity, as you say, Rob, is part of the process. And you, as I mentioned to you privately, it's your idea for first attempt in learning. That acronym was an inspiration for my business, actually, because I really do take that to heart, and I feel that students don't feel comfortable failing enough. There's a lot of apprehension and shame around failure in school that I'm trying to mitigate with gaming. So when I started out as a teacher, it was all about me. I have a little bit of performance in my past, a little bit of I starred in a couple of high school shows, and so I really like to be on stage. And I scratched that itch with teaching a little bit, or early on especially. I would adopt different, as a social studies teacher, I was able to adopt different historical characters, personas, and I have this and I created a persona that is sort of the narrator of these interactions that I call Indiana Royster, after one of my favorite movie characters, Indiana Jones. And I would take my kids through time and space and meet these different figures from history, and that was sort of my shtick. I was big into. It was about me. I was the deliverer of information. I was the deliverer of entertainment, and that worked better than perhaps. When I first started, I didn't really. I was just using the textbook and trying to figure out what I was teaching. But once I started that performing, I saw an improvement for sure. But I still wasn't reaching everybody, and I couldn't possibly maintain that level of energy and excitement and creativity every single day. So we'd have these moments of performance that would occur, I don't know, 8 times throughout the year, but all the times in between were less engaging, and so that was a frustration to me that I wanted to resolve. And then I learned about gamification. So I've been teaching for 22 years now, and so this is a long process. Maybe the gamification started about 12 to 15 years ago. I don't even know if that timeline works. I'm not quite sure when gamification started, but around there. And so I started looking for ways to make my lessons more game-like. And I happened upon this program called 3D Game Lab. It was a service offered online through which I could create lessons that would have badges, points, and leaderboards attached, and as game elements that would hopefully make the lessons feel more like a game. But what I was doing, it was taking lessons that I was teaching in person or on paper, and I was putting them into a digital format, and then attaching these badges, points, and leaderboards into this system. And again, I saw improvement. I saw that there was greater engagement from more students, but it wasn't really what I had hoped for, because there were still plenty of kids who either started enthusiastically and then lost steam, or there were some that really didn't ever get into it at all. It wasn't really hitting whatever needs they have for engagement. So throughout this I guess the big failure here was that I was doing this all alone. I was not really, I work on a team of teachers, and I was trying to get buy-in from my colleagues, who are wonderful teachers, really extraordinary people and teachers. And I was thinking, I thought I had really hit on something that was pretty great. So I was trying to get them to try it, but I wasn't trying what they were doing. I wasn't really open to their ideas. I was really it was again all about me. So eventually, because of that failure to really spread the word and get not only to get my students involved, to get my students involved in the process, which is ultimately the success of this story, is that I got both my colleagues and my students involved in the process. So by finally dropping this a leaderboard, this 3D Resli game, because it was, again, all about the delivery from the teacher, the teacher creating everything. I was frustrated by the fact that I couldn't possibly keep up with all of the changes in the curriculum and add them all to the system. Not to mention, part of what I was trying to do was personalize the learning to give students choices. And I couldn't make, as the curriculum was changing and as history changes and as current events change, I couldn't keep up. And so I started enlisting both my colleagues and my students in the process of creating the games and the lessons. And when I say my colleagues, they weren't the ones creating the lessons. They were the ones I was collaborating with on doing their stuff. So I started getting ideas by starting to try what they were doing in their classrooms, which was not game related per se, but really some great teaching that they were doing that I wasn't really thinking about. I employed some of their techniques, which part of which was this opening up the classroom to more student involvement and more creation, more creativity on their part. I solved one of the major problems I was having, well, a number of them actually, by getting the students involved in the creative process. I started hitting higher level thinking skills, which are more universal. The 21st century skills like collaboration, critical thinking, communication. All of those things were getting hit and the creativity. The creativity is at the peak of that Bloom's taxonomy because they're creating the lessons. I'm also getting them more involved because they're choosing what they're teaching about within the curriculum. I created this framework. I'll give them some options within a particular curriculum objective. I'll let them figure out what is their area of interest. Because that was opened up for them, they felt a greater sense of purpose. If you're familiar, I'm sure you're familiar with Dan Pink and his intrinsic motivation methods, which include creating a sense of purpose, opportunity for mastery, and also autonomy. So by giving them autonomy to not only to choose some of the lessons that I was trying to create for them, now they have the autonomy to create their own lessons. The sense of purpose comes through the authentic audience that they had because they're now teaching. They become the experts in teaching each other this content, this little bit of content. And also it took some of the burden off of me of trying to be and do everything, which I couldn't. And so I was failing on many levels by not by not collaborating with my colleagues, by trying to go alone. I was closing myself off to great ideas that my colleagues offered. I was also they were less willing to try my ideas because I wasn't willing to try theirs. So by finally collaborating, finally being open to trying some of their ideas, they started trying some of my ideas. So that's one success that I had. The other was also making it all about me and switching that to making it all about the students, where they become the center. They become the centers of their own little teaching microcosms. And that creation process is way more important than any of the content that they learned or taught. The creation process itself becomes the greatest learning. It's the skills that they're learning through that creation process, that collaborative, critical thinking, creative process. Those are the universal skills that they're going to need in the future, not the specific content. So that was a long answer to your question, but I think
In fact, I would almost argue, Jeremy, that you got us there with the fail because that was what happened at the start. But then it became a success story. Yeah. I think we got our success from that. So on both ends, you kind of summarized it at the end. But what would be like the main things if you had to sort of put it in a few bullet points? What would those bullet points say? Like, how did you get there? Well, I did this, and this is what I did wrong, and this is how I did it right after. Like, how can we see it that way?
So I guess the first thing so am I starting with the failure, or am I starting from the success, the path of success?
Both, of course.
Okay. Well, the failure comes with just trying something new. All right. So there has to be an openness to failure. There has to be a willingness to fail, and actually an expectation to fail. Because to expect to get anything new done right the first time is I think foolish. And so, but then again, just using the words right and wrong, even just categorizing it as somehow not right to fail, that's a stigma we don't need and is not useful. The failure is actually, and the reason I call it fearless attempts in learning is because I really do hope to take some of that fear out of it. I really hope that that by modeling it for my students, by being open about my failures, by asking for their help, by enlisting their support, that they see that it's an okay thing to do. So just being open, even telling your students off the bat, listen, I'm trying something new here. I'm going to need your support. I'm going to need your feedback, and I'm going to need your creativity. I'm going to want your help in actually building this and making this better. So starting there, if you start that way with any new thing, you're setting yourself up for greater ultimate learning for students and yourself. That ultimately, when I did that, when I opened myself up to help from my colleagues and my students, that enabled me, I think, to get to a more successful outcome. So I did that. I started to think about whenever the process of making this work involves me thinking about how do I reach each of those students? How do I get all of the different types of gamers / learners engaged? Because, there are different kinds of gamers as learners: explorers, competitors, socializers, creators, and they all need that itch scratched if you want them to be engaged. So there is no way, again, you as the teacher, if you try to hold all of the control, you can't scratch all of those itches by yourself. There's no way you can do it. They're the only ones. The students, you have to teach the students, train the students to scratch their own itches, to figure out how learning can be enjoyable for them. So you're setting them up to become involved in the creative process, and that creative process ultimately will scratch their itch, because they are going to have the autonomy to find something that they're interested in, create something around that thing that they're interested in that is engaging for others, hopefully, and you train them perhaps on something that, like, say, Google Forms, you can turn Google Forms into choose your own adventure like experiences, something simple, maybe a piece of software or something else that you feel comfortable introducing to your learners, and then let them run with it and have them teach you, have them show you. I mean, get their help even in the setting up of the structure of the project. This is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking about doing it this way or this way, this way. Would you like all these choices? Is it too much? Do you have other ideas? How would you go about here, or even just giving them the objective? This is what we need to get to. This is the skill we need to learn. This is the content we need to learn. How should we go about this? And get them to give you some feedback. Get them to work together in groups. All of that is the higher level 21st century thinking, and they're fully engaged. And that's even without the gaming. The gaming is one of the reasons it's great is because it changes the tone. You're no longer, when you're playing a game with your students, you are no longer the authority figure. You're the supporter. You're the collaborator. You're the helper, and that takes some of the fear out of it. So you can also, creating a narrative through the game is something that gives a sense of purpose to students who might otherwise not feel that the subject matter is purposeful for them in any way. So there's ways to artificially to manufacture a little bit of that intrinsic motivation as well.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely.
I think did I get to the end there? I think I did.
I think so.
Yeah, they create it, they do it, and then once they have their authentic audience or their collaborative experience, that is that's the goal. The goal becomes you're translating the original learning objective that you're given by your district or by whoever is your curriculum leader, and you translate that into a universal skill that can be performed. It's got to be an action. It's got to be something that they're doing, not something that they're just ingesting and regurgitating.
Absolutely. And talking about that, when you're facing one of these challenges, because you've given us all that juice, but now I'd like to know, when you're facing one of these challenges, say you're going to create a new lesson or you're teaching a new course, I don't know, how do you go about it? Like, when you're thinking of maybe gamifying, of all this inclusiveness that you were talking about with your students, how do you do it? How do you manage to do that? Do you have a process? How do you go about it?
Yeah, so the process involves just letting go. Ultimately, I'm going to start with the curriculum objective that I'm required to teach, and I'm going to have to somehow translate that into a universal 21st century skill objective, because those are more universal, that your students can hit critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, communication, no matter what your curriculum objective is. Those performances, those skills can be honed if you open up the floor to students teaching each other, if you open up the floor to students creating something for each other. So as long as I do that, as long as I let go of that control and give the students room to create and to teach each other, I ultimately have an outcome that for me, is successful. And the gaming could be, for a game is really just a learning experience in a controlled, it's got a controlled set of rules or a controlled structure that oftentimes has a narrative, whether it's implicit or explicit. The narrative of chess is, a battle between two kingdoms for territory. Any implicit or explicit narrative that is applied to their own game will make it a more engaging experience for each other as well. So I'll model that certainly earlier in the year, and I work them through the stages of creating something that becomes more and more engaging throughout the year. So, for example, in the beginning of the year, they might, I'll be delivering content more than they're taking it and running with it and creating their own content. They have to see it modeled first. And then I'll give them opportunities to create, in a scaffolded way, something that is more like an assessment than really a game. They might make a quiz for each other in Google Forms based on the content that they're interested in. So they still have the autonomy, they still have the mastery, and they still have the sense of purpose because of their authentic audience. But then finally, by the end of the year, I'm going to have them building things like choose your own adventure games through the Google Forms. And they come up with their own ideas too. They have programs that they're familiar with that I don't even know about. And every year it's different. They're creating little video mashups that take their students on a narrative adventure, and then they stop the video mashup and the student has to answer a question or something. They've got board games that they've created that work for each other. So it doesn't always have to be digital, but lately with COVID, that's been the way of it. So yeah, the process is starting with the curriculum objective, translating it into a 21st century skill, getting student input, student creative process. They have to go into one big part of this as a social studies teacher is to make sure that they're getting reliable information. Fake news is becoming a bigger and bigger problem, although it was always sort of on my radar, even before it was called fake news, just this idea that information on the internet is so vast and infinite that you can easily be misled or arrive at information that you think is reliable, and it could be misleading, it could be biased, it could be propaganda. So making sure that they're finding reliable sources of expertise to help them create their games, that's a big part of the process, and then letting them run with it and share.
That makes a lot of sense. So thank you for sharing all of that process, all those things, all those ideas that you do when you're creating your own stuff in your own classroom. Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification. And Jeremy, what would you say is something that would be, I think you've given us many, but if I had to sort of put you and ask you for one, what would be a best practice? Something that you would say, well, by doing this, you're definitely going to help your gamification process.
I would say, I think making sure that you are prepared to iterate, that you leave room for failure, time for iteration, and headspace for iteration. Just letting go of that need to be perfect, the need to be the source of perfect information. I mean, I'm constantly in front of my students. I'm saying, "Whoops, first mistake this year." It's a big joke, because obviously I'm making mistakes all the time, and and they're pointing them out to me, and I'll say something that. So many things I've taught, even in the past, just historically, you find out the deeper you dig into history, the more nuance you find, the more you realize that what you taught the year before was probably biased or incomplete, and just that going through that iteration process, and then the creative activity. So any game-based solution should include some creative piece where students are sharing expertise, capitalizing their strengths as a part of a team or in front of an authentic audience. I think those are essential. So I think those two.
So there you brought in those two very good best practices. Makes a lot of sense, Jeremy. And you've gone through these questions. You've heard a few interviews as well, as we were mentioning at the start. We would like to know if there's, continuing in that recommendation, so to speak, is there anybody that you would recommend to have on the podcast? Somebody you'd like to listen to on Professor Game?
I've been listening to a podcast called 10,000 No's by Matthew Del Negro. He's an actor, and his theme is all about failure. And he was also another one of my inspirations for trying to apply some of his thinking that he thinks about how his history as an actor, how his experiences facing rejection daily. I mean, it's a really in your face kind of failure, as opposed to the kinds of failure that we, label ourselves, where he's literally, his job, his livelihood, his family's, next meal depends upon him overcoming failure and getting back and pounding that pavement and doing it again. The lessons he's learned and that he then tries to take from his guests, which are people from all walks of life, not just actors. He has a lot of context in the acting world, but there are universal lessons that everyone can bring to the table about their own failures. And I love the fact that you asked those questions early in your interviews as well, because it's part of everyone's process. And how can we learn from not only other teachers, but people in different professions, how their lessons of overcoming obstacles can apply to what we do. So he'd be, I think, a great guest, maybe a little out of the box, but someone that could. And he's also working on creating his own lessons, online lessons to teach these skills actually on his website. So he's becoming a teacher as well, and has been a teacher in acting, but teaching just how to overcome failure in general. So he might have a lot to offer.
Sounds like an interesting character as well to interview. So that would be Matthew Del Negro, right?
That's right.
And in that same recommendation area, is there a book that you recommend to the engagers? What book would that be and why?
I think a book that really changed the way I think about failure and business, because even if your business is teaching, this book I think has something for you. It's called Business Brilliant. And it's written by Louis Schiff, and he's an entrepreneur, and he interviews entrepreneurs, and not just entrepreneurs, but he took a lot of data from people that are among the most successful entrepreneurs and high earners in the country, and then also collected a lot of data about people that are maybe fall into the middle class or lower than the middle class. And one interesting finding that I'll share with you is that when he among that data, he found that the people that are the highest earners tend to be people that specialize in one area, whereas the people that are learners that or earners, I should say, that don't end up breaking incredibly new ground are not specialized in one particular area. They don't find their one strength. They tend to be more like Renaissance people. That is the Renaissance man is sort of this heroic character that we imagine, can do a little of everything, or maybe everything very well. And that idea, the idea that a person has to be able to do a lot of things really well in order to be successful, I think that's no longer true. I think if it was true ever, I think we're entering an age where specialization is becoming more and more important. I mean, we know that for us to move from hunting and gathering to civilizations, we did have to be, we had specialization is what made that possible. That people started to identify single areas that they could become experts in, and then become so skilled at it that they would innovate and come up with new ways to do these things that they specialized in. That, I think, is happening today too. I think that today, now that we have this age of information where everything is available, things are becoming automated. We've got the business world, the people that can perform tasks, a variety of different tasks that are, if any of them are automatable, if any of them are tasks that a computer could do or a machine could do, it's not something that's going to last. So the people of the future, the people that are going to have the jobs of the future, are the creators and the people that are specialized in one particular area, because there are more and more areas to specialize in as well. So I don't know. That was a kind of a mind-blowing revelation when I read that book, and he has many more that are all based on science, all based on data that he's collected through these interviews of these very successful people.
Absolutely. It makes a lot of sense, the whole specialization. Sometimes, people are kind of afraid of saying, well, what if that thing disappears? What if that thing is not really the thing? What if it fails? What if whatever? Well, maybe you can have 2. But if you try to have 10, I can tell you you're not going to be especially great. Right. Probably any of them. So that is, some food for thought. Keep it there. Think about it. And then you'll probably realize how that actually comes to be pretty much, or quite a bit, true. So thanks for that recommendation as well. Jeremy, Sounds like a very exciting book.
Yeah.
And Jeremy, we come to a very difficult question now. It is the question that is all about games. And we would like to know, what is your favorite game?
Yeah, I had to give this one some thought, as I know this is the one when I hear your interviewees struggle with the most. You're right; it is a difficult one because there are so many great games. So I love games that are in some way reflections of real life. I mean, I know they all are, but that are maybe more directly reflections of real life, either historical events or universal skills or universal themes. So, Monopoly would be one of those, although Monopoly, I've found that always ends up with somebody in tears because there's such a painful second half of the game where somebody has all the property and the other person it just knows that the end is inevitable, But I do like games like that because Monopoly, you are learning something about the world. You're learning about how real estate can lead to wealth and the process, some of the process involved. A couple of other games I love that I even use in my classroom are Catan and Risk. Risk is I've heard that mentioned on your show before. You've got these armies that are people are trying to take over the world through their placement and strategizing of where to put their armies, and it's also a game of chance. Dice are involved, but learning a little bit about geography, learning a little bit about strategy, a little bit about how the world has been in part conquered because some of those game techniques are techniques that have been used in real life as well. Catan is a great one for teaching about geographical resources. All the resources that you're trying to collect in order to win the game are important considerations when you're learning about how history has developed. What geographical advantages did certain societies have that gave them advantages over others? Ticket to Ride is another one. I'm going on and on, but there are a lot of games like that.
But I'm gonna hold you down here because we asked for what is your favorite game, not the one that you maybe use more in class. It could be maybe the one that you use more in class, or the most classic game that you enjoy the most. I don't know. Go for a game. If we hold you to the fire in that sense, what would you say?
Well, I'm really loving escape rooms. You mentioned in my intro that I'm developing or have developed an educational escape room, and those I think are just so much fun because they're like haunted houses with it can be any theme. It can be the world is about to ironically, right before COVID hit, I went to an escape room that the theme was a pandemic had taken over the world, and you had to find the antidote, and so you there's all this narrative imagination that's involved. There's so many interesting clue puzzles to solve, and there's even just figuring out what the objective is there's so much executive functioning going on, and teamwork. You have to work with a team and collaboration, and an escape room can be so many different things, and so stimulating. So many different ways that you can try to go through a series of problems to arrive at a conclusion. It really feels like the most challenging and exciting game that I've ever played. I've done a few live ones, and now I'm trying to create a virtual simulations for my students. One is called India in the Middle East. So I took that character that I created and I put him into this narrative, and I have the students move throughout this virtual reality room to figure out where's India. So it's sort of like a cross between Indiana Jones and where in the world is Carmen Sandiego. And they've been having a lot of fun with it, and so I'm excited. Like I said, they're my guinea pigs, and I'm learning more from them than they are from me.
Sounds like very exciting. So escape rooms are your favorite, at least modality of games that we could argue definitely is in place. So Jeremy, we have a final one, and this is all about you once again. What would you say in this world of gamification, of teaching, all these things, what would you say is your superpower? That one thing that you do better, at least than most other people.
I think my willingness to fail and model my failure, to make my failure transparent for my students, and also to be open to the learning that is the learning opportunity that is always there, the openness to revision. Because I'm open to it, I think I'm able to revise and iterate more quickly because I'm not wallowing in self-pity when the failure occurs. I'm always looking for the error, as it's happening. I'm looking for the way to revise. I know it's there. So I think the iteration process probably moves more quickly for me than many people because of that.
That sounds absolutely great. Absolutely fantastic. And Jeremy, before we let you go, is there any quick final piece of advice you have, please let us know where we can find more about you and F.A.I.L University as well. And then we'll say that it's game over.
I would say start small and stay small. I listened to one of your podcasts about short sims. I really love the idea of really just shooting for maybe one objective, making it fun, giving kids control, getting their advice on how to make it feel like a game, and then show them how to do the same process. Get their help in every respect. Get their help in terms of what they think is fun. Get their help in the actual creation. I would say that's let go. Cede your control to your learners.
Sounds great, Jeremy. And where can we find out more about you and F.A.I.L University?
My website is failu.org. And the best way to reach me is jeremy@failu.org. So that's FAILU.org.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense, Jeremy. Thank you very much. We're recording this on a weekend, so you're taking off your time from your 4 teenagers at home as well.
That's not a sacrifice, Rob.
Things seem to be going well during the weekend, at least for this almost an hour that we've been together for now. But at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Hey, Engagers, thank you for listening to Professor Game Podcast. And if you want more interviews with incredible guests like Jeremy, please go ahead and go to professorgame.com/subscribe and get started into our email list. That way we can be in contact and you'll be the first to know of any opportunities that Professor Game might have for you. So professorgame.com/subscribe. And before you go on to your next mission, remember to subscribe as well using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.